So I actually read a Star Wars book, and since I like to talk about Star Wars, let's talk about it. Star Wars Bloodline. So, to give you a heads up, I'm going to do a spoiler-free review in this video, and then I'm going to have a companion video to this where I'm going to talk about all the good bits if you're not planning on reading the book. If you don't read books, if you're not going to listen to it on Audible, but you want to know the good pieces of canon, the kind of the stuff that leads into The Force Awakens, that informs what we know, I'm going to make a video that tells you all the good bits that you want to know so you don't have to read the book. As a little background, before I go into my review, this is only the second Star Wars book that I've ever read, and the first one was the first book in the Heir to the Empire series by Timothy Zahn, and I didn't really care for it all this much. I actually like this a good bit more. So to give you some background, if you're someone that's kind of new to Star Wars books and kind of skeptical, that's where I'm just one or two books ahead of you in all of this. With all that said, let's talk about the plot. So in Star Wars Bloodline, it's set about 20 years after Return of the Jedi. It's set about 6 years before The Force Awakens, and Princess Leia is now Senator Leia, and it's been a time of peace. But while it's been a time of peace, the government has been mostly ineffectual, and there's a lot of tension, and there's a lot of stirring of emotions, and the tension is really, you can just feel it within the galaxy as two different factions. The populists that are really kind of more for planet rights, would be the equivalent of state rights for us, and the centrists, the people that want a strong central government. Basically, the centrists are people that kind of want a new version of the empire, and the populists are people that want a democratic kind of democracy, kind of like the old republic. And so these tend to be kind of the rebellion type people. And these people over here tend to be the remnants of the empire that thought, hey, there were some good ideas in there. That's essentially where our story picks up. Princess Leia is very feeling her age and feeling very weary as she goes looking at this government that she's worked so hard for and seeing and knowing just how ineffective it is, how much it's not doing what it should be doing, and she's frustrated and she's kind of done with politics, and that's where our story picks up. To be clear, this is very much a Princess Leia story. It's all about politics and kind of the climate that led to the rise of the First Order and the Resistance. That's what this story really is telling, her kind of place as the formation of the political structures of the time that The Force Awakens begins. So to have proper expectations, if you go into this expecting a big Jedi adventure, hero's journey with Luke Skywalker, no, that's not what this is. Luke Skywalker is a kind of background character, and I don't think he even appears at all directly. He's talked about, we get a few updates on what he's doing, but we don't really see him in this. We get Han Solo has a bit of a part in it, but he's not like a main character driving the action. This is like a political thriller with some action. About the first act has about one big action kind of set piece in it. The middle act has a big action set piece, and the third act has a big action set piece. But there's a lot of talking, there's a lot of understanding the political structures and the different worldviews of people within the Republic at that time. It's not a big action story, so if a political thriller makes you go, oh, I'd be very interested to know kind of the Star Wars political realm, this is a story that'll probably be very interesting to you. If you're looking for a Star Wars type story with a Star Wars pacing and fast movement, lots of action, that's not what this is. So if you go into this wanting a good political thriller in the Star Wars universe where you get some pretty big reveals about Princess Leia, about the First Order, about the Resistance, that's what you'll get out of this. If you go in wanting some big reveals about Han Solo, Luke, Kylo Ren, that's not really what this is about. It's about this over here, politics and Leia. It's not about Jedi's, Sith, and their kind of stories. There, you get a little bit of an update. You don't get big reveals. In the story, there's two main conflicts going on. The main one that has the meat of the really good stuff is the political conflict between these two ideologies of the populists and the centrists, and where you really start to understand that there's people that really admired the Empire for good reason. The stories we've all heard about Star Wars are always from the perspective of the rebellion and all the negative of the Empire, but there's people that could see the positive in it. And now that the story takes place in a post-Empire world, you see the negatives of that. And so there's a whole group of people that you get a better idea of different worldviews in the world of Star Wars. So that's the main one, that there's a lot of good stuff, this kind of political realm where you get these characters that are really powerful. The second one is kind of the world of gangsters and the people that took the place of the Hutts at this point in time, the criminal underworld and some sort of terrorism, some stuff kind of like that going on in the world. And so this one up here, the political one, kind of drives the character movement, the big reveals that we want, and this lower one about the criminal underworld and terrorism kind of drives the action of the story and makes things kind of move and sets things in motion. This is more of a plot device, and this is the meat up here. This happens so that we can have big reveals up here and big movement in the story up here. I'm trying not to give any specifics really at all, but that's the vibe of this story. So what did I think about this book? Well, my first impression is essentially the first 2/3 of this book were pretty meandering. They weren't boring. They just weren't all that interesting. It was like, okay, we're going off, we're checking out this planet. Okay, we're learning about the politics. And there's some good tidbits kind of thrown in there, but none of it really kind of drew me in. It felt a little bit like I was doing homework trying to continue through the book. I was interested enough. It was more interesting to me than the Zahn book that I went through, but I wasn't just hooked. Then something happens about 2/3 of the way through where you start to go, oh, I see where this is going. Oh, and then you start to reevaluate what happened the first 2/3. And essentially, the first 2/3, you realize they were setting up the pieces, the characters of this real tension. And you could see how if this was like a TV show and this was kind of stretched out, like this would have, like, you see the tension kind of winding in the story and like, oh no. So you get to that last third and you almost feel frustrated when it goes back to action sequences because the political character tension and drama was so much more interesting than just kind of, shoot 'em up stuff and blowing up stuff. And so that's my first impression, is that the last third is so much more engrossing and captivating than the first 2/3, but the first 2/3 were made much better by the last third, which in some ways makes for I like it when a story does that, where the further you go into it, the more you're like, oh man, now I get it. Oh, I see where they're going with this. I see where they're going with this. And so that's my first impression. As I mentioned before, there's kind of these two plots and conflicts going on, the political and the crime world stuff. And all the good bits that you really want are up here. There was nothing kind of in this kind of lower part about the crime world. There was really good and exciting stuff. And it wasn't as interesting of a plot. It was just kind of like we needed to fill in some action stuff and have something to move the plot along, so we just slap this plot line in there. In these two plot lines, I didn't feel meshed super well. This was really well done up here, and this was kind of, okay, it's good enough. We need this for the sake of moving this along, but it's not as good. It's not as engrossing, and there's just nothing really in there that fit into these bigger stories and fit into the movies that made me go, oh man, that was awesome. So when it comes to the characters, of course, Princess Leia is the most interesting character in the book. Most of the new characters are just kind of throwaway characters that weren't all that interesting to me, except this one guy called Ransom, and he's kind of probably the second main character in the story, or he's the most important of the new characters in it, and by far the most captivating. And why he's interesting is because he's a character that's a centrist, that was a big fan in many ways of the Empire. And so you're seeing everything, the rebellion, through his eyes throughout this. And there's a lot of back and forth discussions with Princess Leia, and you can just see her getting fired up whenever they're having these discussions. But the character, as the story goes along, you understand where he's coming from and why he does what he does. They use the character very well throughout this story. And when they first introduce him, you're like, oh man, I don't like this guy. Oh man, I don't like him. And then they very much develop him throughout the story in very good ways, to the level of like, I'm really hoping this guy reappears in another book. It would be awesome if he makes an appearance in one of the movies or something, but this is a really cool character that they worked in that gave a lot of more kind of depth and meaning to the Star Wars universe. A lot of what was missing from The Force Awakens to me was a greater understanding of this new world that we're in, post Return of the Jedi, some of the politics stuff that I understand why they didn't want to get too much into it. This book gives it to you, and this character in particular, Ransom, gives you a lot of that. So some final thoughts on it. It really does in that last third give you helps you understand very much the landing point of where we pick up with The Force Awakens. It lands at a point where you go, okay, we see where that story's going to take off and where these different pieces are, and gives you a much better idea of what's going on, how Princess Leia is ended up with this resistance, how the resistance ties in with the government and the First Order, and all these different elements are filled in quite a bit by this story, especially Princess Leia's role in all of it. And really enjoyed all that. One final criticism, however, that I've seen in all the Star Wars books that I've read, which is 2, so my sample size is not great, but they tend to be overly referencey to the movies in a way that's very awkward to me, where they seem to keep referencing, like, she smiled at him just on like she did on Bespin, and then she looked at Han just like he looked at her before being lowered into the carbonite. I mean, it says these things and it describes it in terms of Star Wars-y stuff, and so it just feels like nudge, nudge. Hey, remember in the movie you saw that you love? They do it too much, especially when the first story's first getting going. It felt like they're trying to tie too many things right back to the original stuff, and then it evened out a little bit as the story went along, but that stuff kind of drives me nuts. Overall, I found this to be a very enjoyable read. If you love Star Wars like I love Star Wars, and you're okay with a political thriller as opposed to a big Jedi action story, you'll probably really enjoy this story, especially if you like the Princess Leia character and want to get kind of a different take on her as kind of an older person reflecting on all that's happened. This is a great book for that. Just you spend a lot of time in her head with her thoughts and her reflections on what's going on, and you can see why she's at where she's at the beginning of The Force Awakens. However, if a political thriller doesn't interest you, this book is not going to win you over. This book will bore you if that's not your thing. So all that to say, I recommend this if you're a big Star Wars fan and want to understand this world. It is a very good read. With all that said, have you read any of the Star Wars books? What is your favorite Star Wars book? Tell me in the comment section. I'm looking to dive into that world a lot more right now. I've got kind of more free time than I've had in a while. Want to embrace Star Wars books more than I have up to this point. So give me your recommendations. Let's have some great conversations down there. If you're new to my channel and you've never clicked that subscribe button, I'd ask you please consider clicking that subscribe button if you like the sound of my voice or the ideas that I have. Remember, I've got a companion piece to this video where I'm going to talk about the spoilers and all the bits that I didn't want to mention in this video. So check that out. And as always, thank you so much for watching.